The stench of his rotting body filled the palace, and he was still alive. What you're about to hear is not part of the official history books. For centuries, historians carefully polished the story of Henry VIII's final days, portraying a peaceful death for the mighty king who reshaped England. But hidden diaries, private letters, and the secret notes of royal physicians reveal a far darker reality. This was not a dignified passing, it was a grotesque descent into horror, a battle between the body's decay and a mind consumed by fear and delusion. These records were deliberately suppressed, tucked away in private collections and locked archives, too scandalous to expose. The king who executed wives, dissolved monasteries, and terrorized a nation did not die quietly. Instead, he suffered a prolonged, agonizing collapse, surrounded by servants who feared his wrath even as his body betrayed him. Modern forensic analysis confirms what the eyewitness accounts describe. Years of untreated injuries, relentless infection, and relentless suffering that culminated in a grotesque spectacle of death. By revealing these suppressed truths, we see the man behind the throne, the golden prince replaced by a tortured, decaying tyrant. What you're about to witness challenges every textbook description and exposes the shocking reality that his court tried desperately to hide. These revelations are backed by evidence, and they rewrite the story of Henry VIII forever. To understand the horror of Henry's final days, we have to rewind the clock. Imagine a young king, tall, imposing, a golden prince of Europe, commanding armies, reshaping religion, feared and admired across continents. He was a man whose presence alone could silence a room, a monarch whose intellect rivaled scholars, a ruler whose charm had captivated courts from Paris to Rome. But even the mightiest fall, and for Henry, it began not with enemies or war, but with a single misstep in the jousting arena. The king's body, once celebrated as a vessel of strength and pride, would betray him over the course of years. What started as power and vitality slowly gave way to injury, infection, and paranoia, twisting a once formidable personality into something unrecognizable. Historians want us to remember Henry as larger than life, majestic and commanding, but the records tell a far more terrifying story. The very tools that defined his greatness, strength, authority, and a relentless will, became instruments of his suffering. Understanding this transformation is crucial because the events that follow are not just about illness. They are about the collapse of a mind, the disintegration of power, and a slow descent into grotesque, almost unimaginable horror. What you're about to see is the truth behind the myth, the hidden story of a king whose body and mind became a prison, where every day was a struggle between life and unbearable decay. The turning point came on a bright January afternoon. Henry VIII, still strong and commanding, mounted his massive warhorse for a joust at Greenwich Palace. Crowds had gathered, the air buzzing with anticipation as two armored titans prepared to collide. But what should have been a display of skill and power became a moment that altered the course of history. The horses crashed with the force of modern vehicles, the king thrown to the frozen ground beneath his destrier. 2 hours passed while he lay unconscious, England's ruler absent from the world, leaving the court and his pregnant wife in paralyzing fear. When he awoke, everything had changed. Witnesses immediately noticed a darkness in his eyes, a volatility previously unseen. His first words were not relief or gratitude, but rage, questioning why the joust had been halted. This incident, seemingly just a sports accident, initiated a slow, devastating transformation. The vibrant Renaissance prince, the dancer, poet, musician, and diplomat, was now replaced by a volatile, paranoid tyrant. Modern neuroscientists examining records believe this was a traumatic brain injury, affecting Henry's frontal lobe, the seat of impulse control and personality. The accident was the catalyst, igniting a chain reaction of physical and mental deterioration. The seeds of cruelty, paranoia, and obsession were planted in those 2 terrifying hours, and from that day forward, England would witness a monarch increasingly consumed by rage, delusion, and unimaginable suffering. Years before the jousting accident, Henry VIII had suffered a leg injury that had mostly healed, leaving only a faint scar. But the 1536 accident tore that old wound open, creating a persistent, agonizing ulcer. In Tudor England, without antibiotics or modern infection control, such injuries were a death sentence in slow motion. The king's legs became a grotesque sight of suffering, with sores the size of fists and then tennis balls, oozing pus that needed to be drained multiple times daily. The smell was unbearable, penetrating the royal chambers, so vile that courtiers fainted or held handkerchiefs to their faces. Dr. Thomas Vickers' hidden notes, discovered centuries later, describe wounds so severe they defy comprehension, swelling with infection, inflamed and unbearable. Henry, obsessed with appearance and secrecy, attempted to hide his decay with perfumes, special compresses, and misleading portraits showing athletic legs. Every day was a ritual of pain, drainage, and concealment. Yet the infection did more than ravage his legs. It began poisoning his bloodstream, spreading toxins that worsened his mood, drove paranoia, and fueled violent outbursts. The Golden King who had once inspired awe was now trapped in a body slowly destroying itself, a man whose vanity and power could not shield him from relentless disease. Every step, every movement became a torment, foreshadowing the horrors that would define his final years. The infection in Henry's legs didn't stay confined. It spread through his body, turning his own flesh and blood into a weapon of agony. Each day, toxins from the rotting tissue invaded his bloodstream, affecting organs and brain alike. Pain became unrelenting, fevers came in waves, and his appetite oscillated wildly, leaving him weak, swollen, and desperate. Modern medical analysis suggests he suffered chronic osteomyelitis, a bone infection releasing inflammatory compounds that triggered neurological chaos. One moment he wept uncontrollably, the next he screamed for death or vengeance. Paranoia took root, convincing him that servants sought to poison him and that enemies lurked in every shadow. This internal war mirrored his external tyranny. Executions multiplied, punishments became crueler, and fear governed the court. Henry's body had become a prison, his mind a battlefield where infection dictated emotion and action. Obesity accelerated as immobility and constant suffering forced him to rely on food for distraction. His once strong, commanding presence was replaced by a grotesque figure, every movement a struggle, every interaction haunted by delusion. Modern historians now understand that his cruelty, mood swings, and obsessive behavior were not merely ambition or temperament. They were the tragic consequences of an unstoppable internal decay. A king undone by his own body, while history recorded only his tyranny, not the hidden horrors that fueled it. By the mid-1540s, Henry VIII was almost entirely immobilized, requiring servants to lift him from bed and transport him in custom-designed chairs. Hallways and doorways had been widened, floors reinforced, and furniture altered to accommodate his immense size. Yet even these measures could not contain the psychological horror consuming him. He began seeing visions of dead wives, arguing with ghosts of past victims, and conversing with figures who had long since died. His paranoia escalated, convinced that every servant, every page, might poison him. The court developed a silent warning system with colored ribbons, red for rage, black for despair, white for calm, so servants could anticipate his volatile moods. Every gesture, every word became a delicate negotiation with a mind unraveling. He obsessively inspected bandages, tested ointments on unsuspecting staff, and watched his food with the suspicion of a man who had long abandoned reality. These interactions were terrifying for those around him, and yet Henry remained king, issuing commands, executing policies, and enforcing law, all while trapped in a body and mind consumed by illness and delusion. His isolation became total, the palace a gilded cage, his subjects terrified of even the smallest misstep. History remembers the power of Henry VIII, but these records reveal a monarch already lost, held together by force, fear, and a decaying body that would ultimately dictate his final years. By 1542, the king's leg ulcers worsened dramatically. Green, brown, and foul-smelling pus leaked continuously, stinking the air despite incense and perfumes. His body swelled, weight ballooning over 350 pounds, further immobilizing him. Organ failure began silently, his liver, kidneys, and heart struggling under the constant assault of infection. His face, once bright and commanding, became distorted, yellowed, puffy, and grotesque. The slightest movement caused pain so severe that even silk sheets could make him scream. Fever and delirium alternated with terrifying moments of clarity when he understood his own impending death. He begged physicians for salvation, promised wealth, and threatened vengeance when treatment failed. The court lived in terror, knowing that even minor mistakes could provoke the king's wrath. Every day was a performance of agony and control, the king attempting to maintain dignity while suffering unimaginable physical torture. The closer he came to death, the more grotesque his body became, a cruel reminder that power offers no protection from the slow, relentless decay of flesh. These final days were not just a decline, they were a spectacle of human suffering, a reality too horrifying to fully capture, yet meticulously recorded by those brave enough to document it. Henry VIII did not die peacefully in his sleep, as official accounts claim. On the night of January 27, 1547, he suffered violent seizures, writhing uncontrollably as 6 men struggled to hold his massive body on the bed. Vomiting black bile indicated internal hemorrhaging, while his swollen tongue and distorted features made speech almost impossible. Between spasms, he cried out for his dead children, miscarriages, and first wife, pleading for forgiveness. At times, his voice became high-pitched with terror, screaming about invisible flames and unseen demons. Archbishop Cranmer, summoned for last rites, could barely remain in the chamber, excusing himself to vomit twice from the overpowering stench and horror. Yet Henry tried to maintain control, attempting to sign death warrants even in his dying moments, targeting long-forgotten enemies. The right side of his face drooped grotesquely during a massive stroke, his breathing reduced to a wet gurgle, the death rattle medical experts recognized today. At 2:07 a.m. on January 28th, the king's grip slackened, and Henry VIII of England, the ruler who had reshaped religion, executed wives, and instilled terror, finally died. His passing, however, was only the beginning of the grotesque events that would follow. Power could not protect him from the ultimate horror: death. The king who once towered over Europe ended his life screaming, consumed by pain, terror, and the relentless decay of a body that had betrayed him completely. Even in death, Henry's body refused to rest. His leg ulcers, untreated for years, accelerated decomposition within hours. Swelling increased as gases built inside the body, turning the king into a grotesque, half-living spectacle. Embalmers faced a nightmare, packing over 100 pounds of salt and aromatic herbs into cavities, wrapping him in waxed cloth, and sealing him in reinforced lead. Yet the smell was unstoppable. The corpse hissed and gurgled, the lead coffin beginning to bulge from internal pressure. Court officials were horrified as they realized the king's decay would expose the grotesque reality of his final days. The body, massive and bloated, defied containment, a visual and olfactory horror that terrified all who came near. Despite extraordinary efforts, the king's decay became a grotesque display of human frailty. Courtiers, servants, and embalmers worked in terror, masks covering their faces as they tried to contain the unstoppable corruption. Henry's reign of terror ended not with dignity, but in a grotesque reminder that even kings are mortal. His corpse became a silent testament to decades of suffering, injury, and infection. A final statement of decay that history tried to erase but could not fully hide. The humiliation did not end with embalming. During the procession to Windsor Castle, the coffin, weighing nearly half a ton, was pulled by 8 struggling horses. On the second night, it stopped at Can Abbey, ironically one of the monasteries Henry had dissolved. Overnight, the pressure of gases inside became unbearable. The lead split with a thunderous crack. Putrid fluids leaked onto the chapel floor, so foul that guards fled. By morning, scavenging dogs had entered, licking up the fluids. The king who once claimed divine authority, who shattered monasteries and executed wives, had become a spectacle for animals, a terrifying collapse of power and dignity. Workers hastily resealed the coffin, but the damage was done. Henry VIII, the self-proclaimed anointed ruler of England, was no longer revered in death. The final indignity became a symbol of mortality, decay, and the limits of even absolute power. History, forced to hide this grotesque episode, replaced the horror with sanitized accounts. But the reality was far more shocking. A king undone by disease, injury, and human frailty, consumed by a body that could no longer obey him. Even in death, Henry's decay proclaimed the brutal truth that flesh is mortal and even a tyrant cannot escape it. Henry VIII's death and the grotesque condition of his corpse were immediately covered up. Edward Seymour and the Privy Council ordered absolute silence, threatening death to anyone who spoke. Official proclamations claimed the king had died peacefully, resting in the faith of God. Foreign ambassadors were told the same. Behind closed doors, plans were made to manage the decaying body, hide the stench, and preserve royal dignity as much as possible. Witness accounts were destroyed or suppressed, diaries hidden, letters locked away. Even the artistic record was altered, portraits erased or repainted to remove macabre details, masking the reality of his body's decay. Historians, relying on these censored sources, presented a sanitized narrative that omitted the horror, transforming Henry into a myth of majesty rather than a man who suffered in unimaginable ways. The cover-up was as meticulous as it was extensive, ensuring that the grotesque final days of England's most notorious king would remain hidden from public memory. The truth survived only in fragments, in private diaries, clandestine physician notes, and foreign ambassadors' reports waiting centuries to be pieced together. The story of Henry VIII is no longer just the story of a tyrant king. It is the story of a body that betrayed a mind, of flesh decaying under the weight of power, disease, and obsession. The Golden Prince who once danced, debated, and ruled with intelligence ended as a grotesque figure, a cautionary tale of mortality. His reign reshaped England, his decisions altered religion and politics. But none of that could protect him from the slow, relentless horror of his final years. By understanding the hidden truths of his suffering, we can see the human side of a figure history often deifies or demonizes without compassion. Henry's life and death remind us that even kings, wielding absolute power, remain subject to the immutable laws of the body. Vanity, paranoia, and fear could not prevent decay, and history's sanitized narratives can hide only so much. The king who executed wives, conquered enemies, and terrified a nation ended in unimaginable pain, a man both feared and pitied. His story, now fully revealed, reframes the legacy of power, mortality, and the terrifying cost of unchecked authority. This hidden history is only the beginning. What you've seen about Henry VIII's final days changes how we understand the Tudor dynasty, revealing conspiracies, cover-ups, and secrets historians tried to bury. Next, we'll explore the real reason Anne Boleyn was executed, a truth far darker than you learned in school, entwined with espionage, secret alliances, and shocking betrayals. Subscribe now to follow this series of suppressed Tudor history, where every revelation challenges what you thought you knew. These stories are not just about kings and queens, they're about power, human frailty, and the lengths people go to hide the truth. The secrets of the past are waiting to be uncovered, and you will witness them in all their shocking detail. Don't miss the next investigation, because the truth about history is far stranger and far more horrifying than any fiction. This hidden history is only the beginning. What you've seen about Henry VIII's final days changes how we understand the Tudor dynasty, revealing conspiracies, cover-ups, and secrets historians tried to bury. Next, we'll explore the real reason Anne Boleyn was executed, a truth far darker than you learned in school, entwined with espionage, secret alliances, and shocking betrayals. Subscribe now to follow this series of suppressed Tudor history, where every revelation challenges what you thought you knew. These stories are not just about kings and queens, they're about power, human frailty, and the lengths people go to hide the truth. The secrets of the past are waiting to be uncovered, and you will witness them in all their shocking detail. Don't miss the next investigation, because the truth about history is far stranger and far more horrifying than any fiction.